Alright, so Dan and I got married in 2002, and I definitely knew I was really struggling with tampons and was not having any luck. It was just, we were really young, so it was kind of easy to, there were not a lot of my friends that were using tampons, so it was just, I guess I was in a situation where I didn't maybe have to face the fact that I was so different from all of my girlfriends because they weren't using them either. But I went in, I had some discomfort when I was in my 20s and went in for just a checkup. I knew that it was probably about time and thought it was, I wanted to use tampons and thought it was about the right time to go. And so my first experience did not go well. My doctor was a woman, and I had another woman in there with me, and they went in to do the pap smear. I don't think they used a speculum. I honestly, it was so long ago that it's hard for me to know, but they used for sure the pap smear swab, and it was probably the most humiliating and embarrassing and horrific experience that I had had, especially vaginally at that point. I felt humiliated. The doctor told me to settle down, that I was overreacting and that I just needed to relax. She was just not very kind about it. And then I think what was so humiliating was I felt like my body was out of control and what my reactions were, but then when they left the office I could hear her and the nurse practitioner snickering about it. So I felt like there was something really wrong with me, like that I just was, I don't know, overreacting, and that she felt like I didn't feel what I felt inside. So I avoided tampons at that point, were just not even an option because the experience had been so awful. And then we were getting married, and I was looking forward to intercourse, but I knew that there were some things I needed to work out as far as my body because I hadn't been able to use tampons still at that point. And every once in a while I would fish one out and try and then get scared or nervous and wouldn't go any further. But we were 22 and 24, and it was definitely time to go back to the doctor, and I requested a different one, but it was still a female, and kind of explained to her what had happened to me in the same practice, just different doctor, had happened to me in the first exam and how I had felt and how horrible it was. And so she was like, well, let's go ahead and try. And I truly don't even think she got a finger in, but before, I mean, as soon as she touched me, I would made her stop and asked her to stop. And so she told me to put my clothes back on and pulled me into the room and just said that she thought that maybe my first pap smear had been such a traumatic experience that it probably was the hymen that had caused my pap smear to be so horrific for me, and because of that then I had built anxiety around it. And she suggested that if we got rid of the hymen, that would help with the pain, and then everything would kind of work itself out. So I met with another doctor that day who was going to perform, or would be the one that would perform the surgery, and they said that was their best recommendation. And so of course I wanted an answer to what I was going through, and I wanted to be able to have intercourse. So I went home and talked to my parents, and my parents were very protective of me, as far as they wanted me to save my virginity for marriage, but they also wanted me to enjoy sex as a married couple. So my dad and mom both felt like, yes, let's do it, we don't want you to have a bad road of a sexual relationship in your marriage. So I went in and had a hymenectomy about 2 months before we were supposed to get married. And though I was out under anesthesia for it, so when I woke up, the doctor just made a comment to me, well, we could barely get one finger in before, but now we can get in two, and so you should be good. And I really thought, well, that must have been the problem the whole time, because if I was under anesthesia and they could barely get in one and I was completely relaxed, then it was just all my hymen the whole time. So I went back in for a follow-up about I don't know, a couple weeks later and thought that we would have different results. And then she tried to do an exam, and it was the same exact thing that had happened. And so she asked me to put my clothes back on, and then we sat down and talked, and she went down this avenue of, well, have you ever been sexually abused as a child? And I knew I hadn't been, and I think all my trust in the gynecologist at that point was gone, because I felt like they were trying to send me down a road that was not my road. So I left just shaky, and she told me that I should sit in the bathtub and put 2 fingers in and stretch myself out until I got used to the feeling. And I knew in my head that was never going to happen, because I was too afraid to stick anything in there. But I told her okay and left, and I guess just hoped that when we got on our honeymoon and were more aroused and interested, that it was not so mechanical and medical, that things would just happen naturally, and then they didn't.
So basically, we got married. We went on our honeymoon. I'd known all about the surgery, so for the hymenectomy, and so I knew what the doctor said. Hey, it works. We got to our hotel room, and at night we tried to have intercourse, and I couldn't touch her, and I was like, well, sometimes this kind of stuff happens on your wedding night. You don't necessarily consummate it that day, and maybe the next day or something. So I was disappointed, but at the same time I was like, well, probably tomorrow we'll do it. And so the next day came, and it was kind of still the same situation, and anytime I got close to her, I got pushed away, and it was just a involuntary thing for her. But at that time I was 22. I'd been waiting to have sex for 24, I was 24. Been waiting to have sex for 24 years, so it wasn't quite the experience I anticipated. So I was disappointed. We went in. We tried a couple other times that week, and just thought that, hey, maybe it's because it's so new. This will work out over time.
I even think I tried to make excuses like, well, most couples have done all this foreplay before they get married, and it's just everything happens gradual. And so in my head I almost made excuses for everything, like, well, we're trying to shove everything into one night, that's what it is, it's just too much, And
yeah, so it ended up, as time went on, it just it was disappointing for me, and because of the involuntarily pushing me away, it just felt like I was being rejected all the time. So emotionally, it was hard to kind of get past that for a long time, especially when I kept thinking back to the doctor saying, hey, we can put 2 fingers inside. So I kept thinking, hey, this shouldn't be a problem. We should be able to do something. So at that point, I guess there was almost, between the two of us, a emotional shut off a little bit, where we just felt, hey, we don't, this isn't working, and we kind of didn't have an answer. We didn't know what the problem was, so then we kind of just kept making excuses. Well, this isn't going to work. Oh, I was tired. Maybe next time it'll work. And then eventually it got to a point where we kind of just ignored the problem, because we didn't know what to do. We didn't know physically what was wrong. Emotionally, there just wasn't an answer, so we didn't know where to look. We didn't. The doctors had told her that everything was okay. Fine. Everything was fine. So for a long time, we didn't really, for years, probably 5 years, we didn't really know
anything
that there could be something that was wrong that
would be causing
it. We just I just didn't have a clue emotionally. I just thought that, hey, she just doesn't want to have sex. It's kind of where I was, until she finally went and then found out about vaginismus from
from the doctor.
doctor.
Right, and I think it's like, I honestly, he's so patient and understanding that I didn't even understand how hurt he was in everything, because he kept it from me because he didn't want to make the situation worse. So it just became, I mean, we're really easygoing people that just want to make everyone happy kind of people, and he didn't want, he's not a pushy person, so he didn't want to push me, and I mean, it was truly every time, like, and it was so weird to us because we had looked forward to sex, but then when we were actually faced with it, like face to face, then that's when I just shut down.
Plus, obviously, it got awkward at that same point because stuff wasn't working right. And then, as far as like trying, the longer it went, the harder it was to initiate the contact. Which at that point, like Renae would start crying and say,
personally.
"Oh, Dan's not attracted to me. He doesn't want to do anything." But on my end, I'm like, "Oh, I'm gonna get rejected." So, so when we get to kind of that point, like, I didn't really know what was going on, and I knew that she was gonna push me away, and so when she complained about not wanting to, or about me not initiating anything physical, like at that point, like I didn't know what was causing her pain, and why she didn't want it, but it was almost easier just to take her blaming me, versus I didn't want her to feel like she had something wrong with her, so
Yeah.
like it was. I mean,
it was
that
hard. That was the hardest thing, I think. Not the hardest, but one of the hardest pieces was, like, there was this part in me that, like, understood that he wasn't getting the sex, the intercourse, but we could do other things, and why wasn't he wanting those things? But what I didn't understand was that he just felt so rejected. Like, it was just so hard for him, and that those, even just touching, where, like, I had to be so in control of it that it wasn't fun for him, and so that was definitely hard, and we didn't know, and we found out, 5 years into our marriage, about vaginismus, which for me was a huge, like, I can breathe, like, I have something that's real. So we understood that I had something that was real, but we had no idea what to do. And the doctor I had seen had recommended going to see a sex therapist, but I think back in the back of my mind, all I could get and think about was that first doctor that had said, "Oh, you were or asked me, had you been abused when you were a child?" And so the idea of seeing a sex therapist, I mean, it just scared me to death, because I just didn't want someone to tell me that horrible things had happened to me that I had no memory of ever happening to me. So I shied away from that, and I tried to, it was 06 or 07, so the internet wasn't what it is now. I mean, it was good, but it wasn't like now, where there's so many resources. But I had looked a lot online just to kind of get some ideas, and I remember trying to subscribe to some group. I don't know who it was. I know for sure it wasn't the Women's Therapy Center, but they, like, asked for, like, information, a story, and you had to get approved to be on their secret group or whatever. And they never even sent me an email back, which almost made me feel like maybe I don't really have vaginismus. Like, maybe my thing is it's not the real thing. And we looked into some treatments, and they were really, like, everything I read just was, well, sometimes it's curable, sometimes it's not curable. It just depends on the person and the treatment, and so it just felt like, to be honest, like a whole lot of work for something that might not be cured. And I was more afraid of going to try to get cured and not get cured than I was of having to live with it and having this little piece of hope. But I think when it started to get the hardest was there's two things. I turned 34 this year. But when I turned 30, everything that I thought I would have up to that point, as far as a family was not there. And that's when things just got so hard. And we couldn't even have conversations about children without me just breaking into tears, because obviously adoption was an option, but that felt like a way to hide the problem versus to fix the problem. And again, it's expensive to adopt a child. It's a great thing, but it's just expensive. So it felt like, why would we spend all that money for something when we could possibly have our own if we could just figure out what was going on? So I turned 30, and then more and more friends started to have kids, and then more and more nights would go by where I would wonder if I was ever going to be a mom, and if I was ever going to have a normal sex life, and it was just an awkward conversation for him, because in his head, not that he was by any means unsupportive, but in his head it was, well, we have to have sex to have a baby, like, you're the one kind of holding us back. And so last year-ish, a year and a half ago, two of his younger siblings, he's the oldest of 10 kids, so we've been married for 12 years and been watching a lot of his siblings grow up. And his one little brother got married, and within a month they were pregnant, and his wife is like really young, I think 18 or 19 when she got pregnant. And they were married, so it was all good, but that was just hard, because then the realization that everyone else's lives are going forward, and not that you have to have children, but that was just a hope of ours. So then we found out, so she was having a baby, and then my cousin got pregnant again, and it just felt like everybody's life around me was moving forward. And one of my best friends who had struggled with infertility for 4 years, got pregnant this fall, and as happy as I was for her, I really felt so jealous. And that's when I knew, I needed to do something. I had to find an answer. And I had prayed a lot, because we are very close to God, and there was definitely a part of me that was frustrated. Why, when we did everything the right way, are we struggling? Not that there's a right way, but the way we were brought up to believe, why are you making us struggle? And so I just prayed and prayed and prayed, and really honestly just wanted God to take away the problem. And now I see truthfully that He answered our prayers, just in a different way than I maybe prayed for them. So in January I went and I had sought out a doctor from our church that had a really good reputation, and was actually going to be the doctor to help deliver our friends that had just been done in vitro and gotten pregnant. And I sat in the office and I told him that I was going to be his worst patient ever. He was not going to want to deal with me. And so I explained to him our story and what was going on, and that I didn't think he would be able to do the exam, but that I wanted to figure out how to solve this problem, because 12 years was a really long time to be married without intercourse. I knew it wasn't healthy for our relationship on a emotional, sexual level, and I wanted to be a mom, or at least have the opportunity to maybe be a mom. So he asked if he could try to do the exam, and I said yes. And as soon as he pulled the speculum, well, I was a nervous wreck before he pulled the speculum out, but as soon as he pulled the speculum out, I could feel my heart pitter-patter, and as soon as he went to touch me, I asked him to stop. And the funny thing is I, in my head, felt like he had tried to go in, and now I know he hadn't, but at the time I was just so naive and nervous that every little touch felt like penetration or attempting it. And so he asked me, well, how far are you willing to go to fix this? And it felt like such a loaded question. But I mean, at that point, I had no opportunity except to say, as far as we can go is what I'll do. And that's when he said, well, I know a girl and she had this, and she was just like you, and she got cured, and I know she would love to talk to you, and she would love to tell you her story and tell you how she got the cure. And so we were able to get in touch with another couple that had come here, and they invited us to dinner, and they had just recently had a baby, so it was kind of a really sweet experience, and they were just so changed. Even though we had never known them before, it was so evident in their conversation with us that we knew after our conversation with them that we needed to seek treatment, and we knew there was a way to get help.
That's probably the biggest thing, is just finding out that there really was
yeah.
something that could be done versus, I mean, in the past there wasn't really any hope of ever having everything cured. So at that point, I mean, that's when
everything
we got
changed. Yeah.
really excited and
yeah, it was amazing. Like, just to have the opportunity, because at that point, up to that point, I knew I had vaginismus and I wasn't the only one, but I didn't know a single person that had it, and I couldn't have imagined telling anyone because it was just, I don't even know how to explain it. It was just this lonely, like, not dirty little secret, but it felt like our dirty little secret, because we felt like we were living a lie to everyone we knew. When people would ask us about having kids, we would just always say, well, we're not quite ready, or maybe down the road, or we were thinking we might adopt. Like, we made up every possible excuse, and thank goodness my mom and dad were not the pushy type. But even like with his mom, like every time she would ask me, and she hardly ever asked, but every time she would ask me about kids, I would take it so personally. And my friends that I work with would ask, and I'm a teacher, so obviously I like kids, it was just hard. And so we met with our friends Josie and Adam, and they were like, we know exactly how you feel. And it was like the most freeing conversation that I've ever had with someone, because every anxiety that I felt up to that point of not being able to find a cure was like gone, because they had one in 2 weeks. And so we knew that it was possible, and she just kept telling me, you're going to think you're the one that can't get cured, and you can get cured. And so we knew it was going to be a lot, and I definitely cried a whole lot, like 2 nights after we met with them, about what do we do, should we go, what should we do, and Dan was like, it's not even an option, we're going, we'll figure it out. And I really, honestly, once we made that choice, I never once cried about vaginismus again, until I had to deal with, just myself dealing with the cure. But the months up to coming and waiting for treatment, I knew, because I had met someone and saw them and talked to them, that this wasn't just a fake thing, it was real.
We scheduled the trip out here. I knew that I wasn't going to be able to get off work for the full 2 weeks. So when we scheduled it, we knew that Renae would have to come out for part of the time by herself. So fortunately, we were able to do it where she came out. She actually drove out on Sunday, the day before treatment, and then I was able to fly in on Thursday night after I got off work, which I know, as a husband sending her by herself, I felt really bad, because I didn't want her to have to, one, drive out here by herself, but then two, also start her treatments on her own. So that was probably, with actually coming out here, that was my biggest problem, which I guess is overall that's not a bad problem
Right.
there, but just like feeling like I wasn't there for her as she went through everything.
Yeah, and I could tell he was not nervous about me driving, but just I knew he felt bad that he wasn't coming. And of course, I wanted him to be here the whole time, but we knew from the get go that wasn't going to be an option for us, and so I was fine with it. I think because it was such a big thing that I wanted so badly, I was pretty much willing to do whatever I needed to do as far as pushing myself to get myself here by myself or be here alone or whatever I needed to do for a couple of days because I wanted the cure that bad. I think one thing that helped me, and it's I'm sure different for everyone, but I made the decision before about 2 months after we had booked the trip to tell a really close friend that I was coming, and we shared with her, I shared with her, and he shared with her husband, because they're so close, what was going on with us. And we knew we had their support. And then, actually, as the time drew near, I was so excited about finding a cure that I actually felt, I can't believe it, but more confident telling people what I had. Because someone in my work had made a comment about knowing someone who had been starting physical therapy because she wasn't able to have sex. And like as soon as I heard her say that, I was like, if it were me 12 years ago, I would have wanted someone to say something. And so I just at that point made the decision, like, I'm not going to be quiet about what I'm going through. And it was so freeing for me, and also I had so much support from all of these girls, because I had maybe 8 or 9 girls that knew I was coming out here, and I was able to call them or text them that day, like, heading out for treatment, please pray for me while I drive myself out, and they were always checking in on me. And so, like, for me, that was huge, to know that I was going to have that. So it did take a lot of the burden off. And we made the decision ourselves not to tell our family members until after we had sought treatment, just because we didn't want to worry about them worrying about us. I don't know if that makes sense, but with my friends, I knew that they were just going to support me. And so I'm kind of a nervous person, and I'm usually seem really calm unless it's something that makes me nervous, and then like a whole different part of me comes out. So I was really did not want to fly in and take a cab to the hotel, so I made the decision to drive, so that we would have a car here, and drove out and got to the clinic. And I have to say, like, or I shouldn't say got to the clinic, but got to the hotel that night. And I think one of the things that made me feel so much better in the days leading up is there was a lot of communication via email when we were coming, and I was kind of able to go back through the communication and really take a closer look at some of the specific directions and different things that were asked in the questionnaire right beforehand and whatnot. And so I knew right away that, like, any question I had was an okay one to ask, which made me feel so much better, because just with, like, traveling in and just little things. And one of the things is, like, driving by myself, well, what if something happened to me and nobody knew? And when I got here, like, I had to call in and let the Dr. Ross, know that I was here, even though it was going to be really late. And it's, like, that was just a huge comfort to me. I don't know why it might be different for me than someone else, but traveling by myself and knowing that she was waiting up to make sure I got in made me feel so much better. And so I would say, like, it was hard to not have him here, but then there was a part of me that was, like, so determined to show him that I could make progress. But then it was almost like, at the flip side, I was nervous when he came back that maybe that would change. So that's all me and in my head, and I know that. But it did give me something to look forward to know that when he, especially, like, the first day, is a great day because you get to meet the doctors and talk with them and whatnot. But that first time that you go through a bodywork treatment and you see that, oh, those parts are there and they really do work, it's like a little bit of an adrenaline rush in a good way. Like, it's so exciting. And so, like, to call him and show him, and like, the doctors were so cute because they let me take a picture of the spacers so that I could send it home to show where I was making progress. And so those were ways that we kind of made it fun, so that he could still be part of the process while he wasn't here, was to take the pictures. And I'm sure, I don't know how he felt when he got the pictures, but I'm sure he was probably really surprised because we had never had any success like that. And to see spacers that were bigger than tampons, which I hadn't ever been able to use, and like, wow, it's been just a couple of days, like wow, a lot can happen. So the biggest thing that was hard for me, so midweek I had a total breakdown at breakfast. It was just a lot. I had made really great progress, and I think on Monday, though, like halfway through, I was just still really nervous that, like, what if I just hit a wall and can't get any further? And we had talked to Dr. Ross, and she had explained to me that she felt like I had anxiety, and I had a really hard time with that. Like, I just considered myself a really, I don't know, detailed person, maybe be the best way to put it, who liked to talk a lot. And I didn't realize that some of my talking in circles and the hard decisions were hard because my mind was making them hard, versus like just what normal people feel. Like, I didn't realize that painting 5 different shades of gray on the wall to see which one would be the perfect shade of gray could be just because I was making it hard for myself. And so that was such an enlightening moment, but it was hard. Like, it took me a couple of days to wrap my brain around that and understand that what was going on down here was a lot of what was going on for me up here. And I think that's where it was so important that he was able to be here for me, because when I had that moment, he was here to say, it's okay. And we're kind of the opposite, because Dana's way laid back and I'm way more like ABC kind of person. So that was the hardest for me, was just understanding that, like, it's okay if you have anxiety. That's not a problem. Like, don't be afraid to say you have it, and then deal with it and treat it the way it needs to be treated. I think that, like, the easiest, not easy, but gosh, seeing the progress, like, just overall, like, that was just wow. And then because last week was, like, the first day was it was a hard day on a lot of levels, but then, like, seeing the progress from the first day to, like, day 4, and then, like, this week has felt really not easy, but easier. I don't know how to explain that. Like, it hasn't been easy, but I'm in a lot more control of, like, how I react to it, and it's been easier. And every time it gets easier, it's so freeing. Like, it's like, oh, we've got this. It works. So, yeah, that's for me.
I didn't have much anxiety over traveling here, so I was okay. But I know when I was coming in, since I was flying in late at night, and Renae was worried about coming to pick me up at the airport, which she was going to drive into Newark to get me, and Dr. Ross suggested taking the train and the subway, which I was fine with. I just didn't know when they ran. I didn't know if they came late at night or anything like that. So Renae was kind of worried about me taking the train, but fortunately she was comforted by the fact that we were told they were very safe,
Right.
which
we
they
trusted
were.
the doctors that lived
so,
in the city that knew about it.
so that was good. But it was cool to see just the difference, like with Renae, just even talking to her over the phone in the first couple of days, and then once I got here, just like every day, seeing how much different it was, not just physically, but also like when just the way she thought about things, and didn't dwell on things that could be negatives, and that sort of thing. So it's definitely been a big change, physically and
Yeah.
mentally.
And I think it helped. There's so many things about the treatment that helps, but one of the nice things too is like when we weren't at the treatment, like at the center getting treatment, like there were so many things for us to get involved in here, and Dr. Ross and Ditsa and Lauren, everyone, Sloan were great about like just telling us like where to get a good meal or take a puzzle back to your room and work on it. Just different things to keep our to help make this feel like a vacation too, like just so that it didn't feel so much about, like it wasn't just treatment. And so we, and then when we finally did get to that day where Ditsa was like, go home and have sex, consummate your marriage, and then the encouragement of have fun with it, and like don't make it, it was all so helpful, and just like good, because it didn't feel like we were just only focused on vaginismus, and we were, but it's about understanding it and curing it and still living your life and having fun with it and not being in fear of it. And so despite the hard days, there was always encouragement to go out and do something fun, or to enjoy yourself, or to reward yourself with something. And that was a big part of the treatment that kept it positive, especially for me, is that it wasn't like, and then the answering any question you had, they were like, sure. There was no question you couldn't answer or ask, because they were willing to answer them all. So it's good. I think Dan and I had a really great marriage. Despite the fact that we were going through vaginismus, like we were really committed, and that was wonderful. But I think we're both looking at the future of our marriage a lot differently now that this piece is not something we're dealing with anymore. I don't know if you have anything to add.
Yeah, it's definitely obviously curable. So the biggest thing is just like finding out that we're finding someone that can treat it, which we were fortunate. We found somebody that had been here, and we knew that they had been there. So just knowing that there's a cure is huge, and then just kind of finding a way to get that treatment. That's
following through. I guess for me as a woman that dealt with it, like it would have been so easy after 12 years of a good marriage to just continue on in a good marriage, because we were committed 100%. But I didn't just want a good marriage, and I think all women desire that physical, maybe in a different way than the men, but you want that completeness. And I think just don't be afraid to go to that doctor, and if you go to a doctor and they don't have an answer, go to a different doctor and be persistent, because that was one thing I think for a while we just stopped trying. We stopped looking for answers. And we don't know why it took 12 years to find the Women's Therapy Center, to find a cure, but it's our story, and we're okay with that. And I would just say be persistent, and like know that you can be cured, because you can definitely be cured. Like you could not have told me a year ago that we would have gone to 2 weeks of treatment and then been able to go through all that we did in 2 weeks and be cured by any means. But I think, and don't be afraid to tell people you have it. Like, and don't, especially for the women that I think get through treatment, I think it's so important that we explain to people what's going on, because when I told my friends that I had it, I expected like a gasp of, oh my gosh, I can't believe you, you're like nuts. And they were so supportive. And it was so different than my biggest fear of how they were going to react that I wish I would have told someone sooner, because maybe we could have had an answer sooner. But we will never not tell people about vaginismus, because it's curable. It's silly not to, it's silly to be afraid of it, because there's nothing to fear.